talking to survivors of mass shootings, it's because in some ways I'm sort of processing and untangling my own feelings about what happened in my community.
Yeah, you report on what you call, I guess, the school shooting generation for Vox. What did you find when you spoke to people like you who had lived through these tragedies?
I found that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people across the country who had these experiences at a time when the resources didn't exist for them to get the help that they needed. I found a lot of adults who spoke about feeling the need to behave like they were okay when they weren't necessarily, because they didn't think that they were allowed to be victims. One survivor I spoke to, he was shot in the head, but the bullet only grazed him, and he said, I needed to get back to school right away because I wasn't truly injured enough. Which, you know, in retrospect, he said, is just such a sad thing to think, that I didn't think that I was injured enough. But I found tons of people who felt like they weren't affected or impacted enough to consider themselves victims. And what I found with those people was that much later in life, that trauma came back because they didn't have an outlet for it or a way of processing it.
And they see shooting after shooting, as do you. How do you respond when you see the pattern, this cycle? Is it just more and more trauma?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think it can be triggering for a lot of survivors. One I spoke to told me that before he went to get help, and he was shot when he was 7 at another elementary school shooting in 1989. He didn't go to get help until he was in his 30s, but he said before he got help, he would hear about these shootings and he would just start sobbing. He'd be driving in his car and would just start sobbing because the reaction was so strong. It can also, though, be an opportunity to reconsider what happened to them. One of the survivors I heard from said, you know, I was silent for 20 years and it kept happening and I'm tired of it. And he became a really outspoken advocate as an adult. He was inspired by the Parkland survivors, actually. He said, this keeps happening again and again. I'm not going to be silent about it anymore. So I think it's certainly a double-edged sword. It can be very painful for survivors to have to live through this over and over and over again. But for some, you know, seeing these things happen again had been a moment for them to experience some resilience and decide that they were going to do something about it. You know, they were going to try to fight for a safer world for everyone else.
We know about the Parkland kids. We know there are kids out there who want to fight. But did you talk to anyone or come across anyone who had given up, who said, I'm moving to Mexico, I can't deal with this? Or even just simply, I have no faith in this country, I carry a firearm with me to protect myself, I don't think gun control laws are going to do anything?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I met anyone who wanted to give up and move to Mexico, but I definitely met people who did not necessarily think that gun control was the answer. People who have survived it's not a given that they're going to be pro-gun control. That is more determined by like where someone grew up, by the sort of political and cultural leanings of their environment and their family. And, you know, even some of the people I spoke to who had been through these experiences and had been shot did favor gun control, but also owned guns themselves. Some of them owned assault rifles, which is not a casual gun owner's gun. Some of them had concealed carry permits. So I think one of the things that I have noticed is that we tend to think of these sides as very black and white. You either, you know, absolutely love guns, 100%, you know, NRA member, total ideologue, or you're sort of like a city liberal who would never own a gun and thinks the whole concept is horrifying. But actually there's a ton of people between those two poles. And this is another reason why I think people shouldn't be completely hopeless. There are a lot of people who have complex and conflicted feelings about guns. There are a lot of people who own guns but think that the current situation that we have is not sustainable or tenable. So it's not necessarily one or the other, and that includes people who have been shot in school shootings. There are people who have been shot in school shootings who think that we need better gun control and universal background checks, and also carry firearms themselves and use them themselves. But I will say, just to add on to that, I do think that when we talk about it as completely black or white, which I understand why that happens, but I do think like we start to drift away from the possibility of change when we assume that these sides are this and that and that they're completely entrenched. I think that might be true on a sort of legislative and political level, but among the public, I think there's quite a bit of nuance.